Let's go back in time, way back. About 2,500 years ago, the world was changing so fast it sparked a revolution, but not with swords and armies. This was a revolution of the mind. People started asking some of the biggest questions you can ask. What's the point of it all? Why is there so much suffering? And this period of huge change in India gave birth to some of the most powerful and lasting philosophies our world has ever seen.
So where did all these incredible ideas come from? Well, here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the massive societal shifts that got people searching for new answers. Then, we'll follow the incredible journey of Siddhartha, the man who would become the Buddha, and really unpack his core teachings. But hey, he wasn't the only one asking these questions. We'll explore some other paths to truth from that same era, see how these ideas created brand new communities, and figure out why they're still so relevant to us today.
Okay, so how do we connect with a world from 2,500 years ago? Let's start with something relatable. A school trip. Imagine a young girl named Anaga visiting a place called Sarnath. This isn't just some dusty old ruin. It's a place where history feels alive, like you can almost breathe it in. Her trip is basically our doorway into this ancient world of big ideas.
It all starts with this simple instruction from her mom. See, going to Sarnath isn't just about a history lesson. It's about plugging into a time when everything was up in the air, when people were looking around and asking some really deep, fundamental questions about how to live.
And this is our time frame, 2,500 years ago. You gotta understand, this wasn't just any old moment in time. This was an age of enormous change happening all across India. All that instability and uncertainty, well, it turned out to be the perfect soil for some truly revolutionary ideas to grow.
So, what was actually happening? Picture this. The old familiar ways of life were getting completely shaken up. You had powerful kings building bigger and bigger kingdoms. New cities were popping up and growing fast. Life in the villages, which had been the same for generations, was suddenly changing. In all this chaos, a new wave of thinkers emerged, who looked at the old explanations for life and said, you know what? This just isn't cutting it anymore. They wanted to get to the bottom of what life was really all about.
And one of the most famous of these thinkers was a prince named Siddhartha Gautama. This guy was a kshatriya, born into total luxury. He had everything you could possibly want, but he still felt like something was deeply missing. So he made this unbelievable choice to just walk away from it all, to go out in search of real knowledge.
His journey? Well, it was not quick or easy. First, he left his palace. Then he spent years just wandering, talking, and debating with other seekers. But in the end, he realized the answers weren't out there. He had to find them inside himself. He sat down under a peepal tree in a place called Bodh Gaya and just meditated for days on end until he finally had his breakthrough. He achieved enlightenment, and from that moment on, he was known as the Buddha, which simply means the wise one.
So, after this absolutely life-altering experience, the Buddha made his way to Sarnath. And this is the place where he gave his very first teaching, where he started to share what he had discovered. And his message was, in a way, incredibly simple, but also completely revolutionary.
At the absolute heart of his teaching was this concept he called tanha. You can think of it as a kind of thirst or a craving. He said that life is full of suffering not because the world is a bad place, but because we humans are always wanting something more. Even when we get the thing we want, we're not satisfied for long, right? We just want the next thing. And he taught that this endless cycle of wanting, that's the real source of all our unhappiness.
Okay, so it's one thing to talk about an idea like tanha in theory, but how do you make someone truly feel that truth, especially someone who is just lost in their own grief? This is where the story of a woman named Kisagatami is so incredibly powerful.
Kisagatami's son had died, and she was completely shattered. She went to the Buddha, begging him to bring her child back to life. His response was so gentle, but so wise. He said he would help her, but on one condition. She had to bring him a handful of mustard seeds from a home that had never, ever been touched by death. At first, she was just filled with hope and rushed off to find the seeds. But as she went from house to house, she heard the same heartbreaking story over and over again. This family had lost a parent, the next had lost a child, another a husband or wife. And slowly she began to realize that her pain, as deep as it was, wasn't unique to her. She saw that loss is a part of everyone's story. It's a shared, universal human experience.
So here's the bottom line. The Buddhist teachings were meant to be practical. He taught that the way to end suffering wasn't some magic trick. It was by practicing moderation, being kind, and respecting all living things. He talked about karma, the idea that our actions have consequences both now and in the future. And so importantly, he taught in Prakrit, the everyday language people actually spoke. And he never asked for blind faith. He wanted people to think for themselves.
Now, here's a really important thing to remember. The Buddha wasn't the only one wrestling with these massive questions. At the very same time, all these other thinkers were out there, exploring their own paths to understanding the true nature of reality. For instance, you had the thinkers who created the Upanishads, and they were really focused on the soul. They basically came up with this idea of two sides to it. The Atman, which is your individual soul, the little spark that is you, and then the Brahman, which is this huge, cosmic, universal soul that connects every single thing in existence.
And the big conclusion they reached was just, wow, it was mind-blowing. They believed that the Atman and the Brahman, the individual you and the entire universe, weren't separate things at all. They were actually one and the same. This means that every one of us is part of this one great cosmic being.
There's this great story from the Chandogya Upanishad that just nails this idea. You've got two wise men, or sages, sitting down to eat. A beggar comes up and asks for some food. They brush him off, but the beggar hits them with this amazing question. He says, "If you truly believe the universal soul is in everything, then isn't it in me too? So by denying me food, you're actually denying the very cosmic spirit you worship." The sages just stop, realize he's right, and share their food. At the same time, another path was being forged by a teacher named Gautama Mahavira, the founder of Jainism. His core idea was ahimsa, or nonviolence. But this wasn't just a do-no-harm kind of idea. It was a radical, active, and deeply compassionate commitment to not hurting any living creature. As Mahavira said, all beings long to live. To all things, life is dear. This incredible respect for life shaped everything his followers did, demanding a life of amazing care and simplicity.
Now, ideas this powerful don't just stay as theories written in a book. They inspire people to completely change how they live, to build entirely new kinds of communities. People who wanted to dedicate their whole lives to this search for truth started to come together.
And this is where we see a really fascinating split. On one side, you had the Buddhist and Jain Sangha. This was basically a community of monks and nuns, and it was open to pretty much everyone, no matter their social class, no matter if they were a man or a woman. On the other side, you had the more traditional ashrama system, which was a very structured life path, but it was mostly just for men from the upper classes. The idea that women could just join the Sangha and seek enlightenment for themselves, that was absolutely revolutionary for that time.
So after all this time, 2,500 years later, why are we still talking about these thinkers? Well, it's because their ideas didn't just fade away. They fundamentally changed the world, and they still have so much to say to us today.
Maybe their most radical act wasn't just what they taught, but how they taught it. Before them, a lot of these deep philosophical talks were kept within a small elite circle, spoken in the formal, complex language of Sanskrit. By choosing to teach in Prakrit, the language of the people on the street, thinkers like the Buddha and Mahavira basically threw the doors of philosophy wide open for everyone.
And that kind of brings everything full circle, right back to us. 2,500 years have gone by. We have all this incredible science and technology, but have the really big questions changed? Or are we, in our own modern way, still on that same quest for meaning? Still trying to figure out why we suffer, and still just trying to understand our place in this huge, mysterious universe?